Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining. So this lot is a Parsha Shiur, and we begin a new book. It's been weeks already. I think we basically missed the entire book of Vayikra, the entire book of Leviticus. We left Shul, Parshas Kisisa, I think I was last. We had one more in Shemos. We had already one Chazak we missed. Last week we missed another Chazak. The entire book of Vayikra we missed in Shul, and now we're moving into a new book, into Sefer Bamidbar. Numbers is called Numbers in English, and in many ways we think, okay, we're moving away from the sacrifices, from the temple, from really many portions which are hard to relate to, which we read about in Leviticus, because it's the book of the Levites, and here we move into Bamidbar. And on the one hand, it's true. It is to tell the stories and the episodes of that 40-year sojourn in the wilderness. It's a strange book. As Rabbi Sachs, in the introduction to his Covenant and Conversation on the book of Numbers, describes how, it's in many ways the strangest of the 5 books of the Torah. As we'll see in the Nachmanides, Ramban in his introduction points out there are barely any mitzvot. Barely any unique commandments that we don't find other places, generally barely any commandments, and most of them are repeated in other places. So it's not a book we're reading for the commandments in it, and it's not really a book, even the stories are interesting because they are one-off stories. There are stories about, a unique wilderness experience, a sort of a miraculous experience for most part in the wilderness, and yet we read this book and it's an interesting interplay of narrative and law. All of the Torah is unique that way, that it's a mixture between narrative and law. But Bamidbar, the way it's set up and the juxtapositions are sometimes jarring, and the interruptions, and really it's not just a lot of narrative and a lot of law, it's literally one narrative and a bit of law and a narrative and a bit of law. It itself is strange. But that really only kicks off halfway through Parsha Bahalotecha, really, not this week's Parsha, not next week's, which is not, but nearly the week after that. And the first 2.5 Parsha, the first 2.5 Sidra of Bamidbar, again, still hark back to the existence in the temple, to hark back to temple topics. And the truth is, this year I've specifically been drawn to, I guess, the study of the temple of the Korbanot, perhaps because we're now in a time where we're lacking that communal institution. That's what the temple was, that communal institution. A temple is a communal worship. Perhaps it's right now when we're lacking it and we're living without it. Perhaps it's been a factor to draw me in to try to study more about the temple and its goings on. That said, let me share with you the introduction. See a few words from the introduction of the Nachmanides. Ramban, which was the foremost, after Rashi, possibly the foremost commentator on the Torah. So here I've got for you the text from Sefaria. This is his introduction. As I just said, the whole book of the third book of the Torah, what we call Vayikra, deals with all the laws of the sacrifices. So now in this book, we begin to set out the laws, not about the sacrifices, the temple service, but actually that which went on about the laws which pertain to the temple itself, to the Ohel Moed, to the tent of meeting, the sanctuary itself. Because we read about how they encamped around it, we read about how they assembled it and disassembled it every time they moved, and the laws, the Levium, how the Levium guarded it and how the Levium served in it. So this is interesting, but this is what I wanted to get to. We're told in these portions, Bamidbar, we read about the counting of the Jewish people, and more specifically, we read about how they were encamped around the tent of meeting, around the sanctuary in the wilderness. But we're told that they had to sort of encircle the Mishkan, the tabernacle, Bamidbar, when it was in the wilderness, just in the same way as the Jewish people encamped around Mount Sinai, they encircled Mount Sinai when God came to appear there at the giving of the Torah. In this portion, in Bamidbar, we read about how the Jews had to keep a distance from the temple, and how that's why the Levium, the Levites, and the Kohanim, the priests, they were the ones to encamp most close by the temple in order to ensure the job of the Leviim was to guard the temple, to ensure people didn't encroach. Just in the same way, as we read about with the giving of the Torah, the people were told not to encroach the mountain. Again, only select few, Moshe, the Levite, Aaron, the high priest, only they were allowed to ascend the mountain, and everyone else had to keep their distance, just like they had to keep a distance around the tabernacle in the wilderness. Another example, the end of this portion, we deal with the dismantling of the tabernacle and the reconstruction of the tabernacle each time the Jewish people journeyed. Right, we'll read at the end of the book of Bamidbar, the last Parsha is Matos Masei, details the many, many journeys they took in those 40-year sojourn. But when they came to dismantle the temple, so all the while the tabernacle stood erect, the holy vessels were ensconced inside, were hidden inside. As soon as they took down the structure of the tabernacle, suddenly it was going to reveal the holy vessels. And we were told that the people, even the Levites, who were the ones to carry them, can't set eyes on the holy vessels. So just as here we have a system in order to prevent people seeing the holiness, seeing the vessels of the tabernacle when it was dismantled. So too there, when it came to the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai, the people had to keep a distance in case they encroached liros, to try to see an image of God, of course, which didn't appear. But again, this idea that there's only so far the regular person is allowed to go, and they're not allowed to encroach and not allowed to see further. Just as here it was the role of the Levites to protect and to guard the tabernacle, so too when it came to the giving of the Torah at Mount Sinai, it was the role of the priest, of the Kohanim, to stand guard and to ensure no one encroached and no one came forth. So just as an aside here, is interesting here, is that we read Bamidbar, and the Gemara tells us in Megillah, the end of Tractate Megillah, that the timings of when we read certain parshas are not just happenstance, meaning the choreography of our weekly Torah portion reading, it matches up to the time of year. There's many examples. One of them is, and we actually are very careful about this, the way the calendar is set up is to accommodate for this, is there are two portions of curses in the Torah. One we read last week in the Chukosai, and one we read in Devarim, in Deuteronomy, in Parshas Kisava. And the Gemara tells us that you have to read these curses, the one in Kisava before Rosh Hashanah, that Tichla Hashanah v'Kilel, as if to say, this year as it draws to an end, before Rosh Hashanah, this year and its curses should dissipate, should be done with, and we start a new year afresh. And the Gemara there tells us similarly, we always read the curses of the Chukos last week before we get to Shavuot. Shavuot also obviously a significant landmark in the year, one of the three major foot festivals, and also a new year of sorts. We're learning in the Gemara in Rosh Hashanah and our Gemara how the festivals on Shavuot, one of them is a new year of sorts. It's a time of judgment on the harvest. It's the harvest season. But what's interesting is that we do not read the curses in the Shabbat immediately preceding Shavuot. The way the calendar is set up is that it's always 1 week in between. We read the curses, then we always read Parsha Bamidbar. So Tosfos there in the Gemara says, well, simply they wanted to make a buffer. We don't want to go literally from the week of the curses, the portion of the curses, straight into the festival of Shavuot. So we make a buffer week of Bamidbar. But the truth is, as we've just seen from Ramban, there is a deep linkage. And again, it's specific why we read certain portions at certain times of the year. There is a linkage between our portion, Bamidbar, the Sedra we're going to read this Shabbos, and the festival that comes in the next week, in that being Shavuot. We saw that linkage. We saw how many of the laws and the discussions that are going on in Parshas Bamidbar, what we read about in Parshas Bamidbar, parallel very beautifully to that which went on at Mount Sinai. Again, this idea of keeping a distance from the Mishkan, keeping a distance from the mountain, not seeing God when it came to the giving of the Torah, not seeing the holy vessels when it came to dismantling the the Mishkan, the Leviim here standing guard around the Mishkan to guard it, the Kohanim standing guard around Mount Sinai in order that the people shouldn't approach. Similarly, the gold cherubim, some explain, the gold cherubs that stood atop of the Ark of Holies also correspond to the fire that God appeared on Mount Sinai with atop of Mount Sinai. And in essence, what it is and what's at the root of this is, as Nachmanides goes on to explain, is because the Mishkan is a moving Sinai experience. We meet God at a one-off occasion on the top of Mount Sinai, and He gives us the Torah. He forges a covenant with us, but we concretize that. We bring that into a daily living, into a real existence, by building a Mishkan and putting those tablets, that covenant, the tablets of stone, the 10 Commandments, which we celebrate the giving of on Shavuos, we put them into a holy ark. We house that in a Mishkan, and the Mishkan becomes a moving Sinai experience. And therefore, it makes a lot of sense. What happened as a one-off at Sinai is replicated, and the laws and the safeguards around Sinai have to be replicated and have to be repeated here when it comes to the Mishkan. There's also another linkage between the giving of the Torah on Sinai, the festival of Shavuot, and this portion. The Midrash Rabbah, the Midrash at the beginning of this book of Sefer Bamidbar, tells us on the verse that Vayedaber Hashem Moshe b'midbar Sinai, the opening verse of our portion, that God spoke to Moshe in the wilderness of Sinai. So Lama b'midbar Sinai. Why was it in the wilderness of Sinai? So we begin this book, as Rashi explains, with the book begins on the first day of the second month of the second year after the Exodus. So the Jews left Egypt in Nisan. The Torah was given 7 weeks later on Shavuot in Sivan, they came to Mount Sinai 6 days earlier on Rosh Chodesh Sivan, and they stayed there for nearly a year. So this book begins nearly a year after the giving of the Torah. We've had the golden calf, and we've had the second tablets on Yom Kippur. We've had the building of the Mishkan. The Mishkan is completed on the 1st of Nisan, just before Pesach, 2 weeks before Pesach. And now, 30 days later, on the 1st of Iyar, this is the beginning of the book. They're still in the wilderness of Sinai. God comes to appear to Moshe in the wilderness of Sinai. And as I said, he takes accounting of them. Interestingly, the Kliyaka. So he's a early modern commentator from Prague, the Kliyaka of Ephraim Lunchitz. He explains as follows very beautifully. He says, just as in a marriage, there's 2 stages. There's an engagement and there's a wedding. Nowadays, the truth is, even within a Jewish marriage, there's 2 parts, what's called the Kiddushin and the Nisuin. Kiddushin is the betrothal, when you put the ring on her finger and you say, will you be betrothed to me? And then there's actually something called the Nisuim, a second stage is the Chuppah, is bringing them, coming together in one space, in one home. And the truth is, nowadays we put them together. In times of old, they would separate them out a year apart. So the Kliyaka says, so too when it came to the marriage, this relationship between the Jews and God. What's interesting is that this week's Haftorah, we have the famous verse from Hosea. Hosea 7. Let me just find the text of the Haftorah. So this week we have the Haftorah. It comes from Hosea chapter 2, and the last verses of the Haftorah are these words. God says to the Jewish people, I betroth you to me forever. I betroth you to me with righteousness and with justice, with kindness and with mercy. And I betroth you to me in faithfulness. You shall know the Lord your God. These words, actually, many have the custom to say them when they wrap the tefillin straps around their fingers. So in the morning we put on the tefillin, men put on the tefillin. And as we're wrapping the tefillin straps around the fingers, many have the custom to say these words, the words from Hosea, God saying to the Jewish people, already before that, the verse, the Haftorah describes the faithfulness of the Jewish people, that they followed after God into a barren desert as the kindness of your youth, right? The idea that that you followed after God in the kindness of your youth. And God says, and I betrothed you to me as a people. So as we wrap that like a wedding finger, when we wrap the tefillin on our finger, we recount this verse of the betrothal. So the marriage, there is a marriage. That symbolism of of God marrying the Jewish people is a very real one which is, as I said, which is martial, which is used by the prophet in our Haftorah. Says the Kliyakar, the betrothal, the first part of the marriage is the giving of the Torah. Just like you give a ring, you make kiddushin, so to the giving of the tablets. In fact, that's why Moshe breaks the tablets. Moshe says, God, it's better that if the Jewish people are going to cheat on you, they're going to build the golden calf, and they've yet to consummate the marriage, so to speak. They've yet to have the second part, the nisu'in, which comes with what? As I said, the kiddushin is the ring. The nisu'in is when they go to live together. They live together in a house. The chuppah is supposed to represent that, or the yichud room after the chuppah. They go together to be secluded in a room together, symbolizing or denoting the fact that they're now their own entity. So the Mishkan is that second stage of marriage. There's the betrothal, which is the giving of the tablets. Moshe says, let me break the tablets. Let me take off the engagement ring while they've cheated on you before they've actually consummated it. God forgives us. He gives us a second set of tablets, right? And then he tells us to build the Mishkan. Says the Kliyaka, it's the building of the Mishkan. In this week's portion, the conclusion of it is these two stages. So nonetheless, we come back that this week's portion begins in the wilderness of Sinai. So the Gemara, the Medrash comes back and tells us that the Torah was given with three things. There were three, not prerequisites, so to speak, but three elements. There was fire. As I said, God comes down, ascends to the mountain, there was a fire there. Ubamayim, there's a giving of the Torah with water. Not for now, but why that is true. Bamidbar, the third important ingredient, element, when it came to the giving of the Torah, had to be a wilderness. Well, why was the wilderness? Why was it so important? Bamidbar Sinai, the book we're starting now, Bamidbar, called In the Wilderness. Why was it so important that Torah was indeed given in the wilderness? Why didn't God take us out of Egypt, take us to the land he promised us, and take us to Jerusalem and the top of Temple Mount? That's where he should have given us the Torah. Why did he give us the Torah much earlier? Do it in the barrenness of the wilderness. So the Medrash tells us, Ma elu chinam l'chol be'olam kach divrei Torah chinam heim. Just as the wilderness is free for all, is open to all, is no man's land, so too the Torah is free to all, it's open to all. There's a democratization in the giving of the Torah. It's not for the landed gentry, it's not for only those who can access it, it's open to all, just like the wilderness is open to all. Then the Medrash gives a second reason. Anyone who doesn't make himself like the wilderness, meaning hefka, there's a certain sense of humility, of openness, of willing to engage with others, willing to reach out to others. A hefka, you're accessible, you're open. Such an individual can't truly engage with Torah and its wisdom. Therefore, the Torah is given in a wilderness to denote, just as the wilderness has that openness, so too as individuals we have to have that openness. Rabbi Sachs, in his covenant conversation, links the idea of midbar, a wilderness, in Hebrew midbar, where the Torah, where the Devar Hashem, the word for word of God, Vayedaber Hashem, God speaks to Moshe, the same word of the word Dover, Daber, speech, or Dover, the word of Torah, and he links it to midbar, the wilderness where the Torah was given. And he says that's not something that comes by chance. It's God specifically chooses the wilderness to give the Torah. And he writes, because with the giving of the Torah, with monotheistic ethical Judaism comes in a new idea, a radical idea to the world, and that is other religions of the day and other ancient societies. They had gods, but those gods were all powers within nature, and therefore they could be engaged within the confines of the natural world. With Judaism comes in this radical idea of a God that doesn't exist within nature, a monotheistic God that exists beyond nature, that's the one who's created nature. So how on earth you encounter such a God if he doesn't exist within nature and he cannot really be manifested in the nature? So how can we encounter him? In Judaism, for the first I'm quoting, revelation becomes a problem. Where the gods are to be found in nature, they are close. But if God is beyond nature, beyond the universe itself, then he is vast, beyond our imagining, and infinitely distant. What is the answer? That we don't encounter God in images, in an experience, meaning in a physical experience, not by the force of the wind or the heat of the sun or anything like that, but rather we encounter God through word, through hearing. The whole people gathers around Mount Sinai. As the verses stress, they don't see anything. They don't see anything, they see, yes, some natural phenomenon. Why God brings in those natural phenomena seems to counteract what he's trying to achieve. That's a discussion for another time. And nonetheless, the essence of the encounter is they hear a voice, or they each have a prophetic experience where they experience a voice. They experience something from beyond. Quoting again, a revolution of this magnitude cannot take place under ordinary circumstances. Meaning, in the great river lowlands where civilization began, right, in the Euphrates or in Egypt, the eye is captivated by the shifting scenes of nature. In cities, by the works of man, art, and architecture. Only in the emptiness of the wilderness is the eye subordinate to the ear. Only in the silence of the desert can the sound beneath sound be heard. Meaning, why is it that the word of God, which is the key, crucial encounter that we experience God as the Jewish people and accept him as our monarchy, as our God, and we receive the Torah, is linked to the word, Davar, the word of God is linked to Bamidbar, the place, the only place that encounter could happen, which is in the wilderness. But there in the wilderness, in that emptiness, in that vast emptiness, where there isn't the distractions of the dazzling, dazzling creations of man, or even dazzling nature. It's not by a waterfall. It's not by a great mountain region. It's not by a great river Nile that floods its bank and banks and waters the entire valley. And it's not by the great ziggurat, top of ziggurat or pyramid, but it's in the open space. It's in the emptiness. Not for the reason we said before in the Medrash that it's more ethical. That it's talking about man's openness and man's emptiness compared to others, but rather to denote that openness, that it's only there that truly the word of God can be heard. Rabbi Sachs also offers an important explanation that it's specifically here in the wilderness and not in the land of Israel that the Torah is given, because in most civilizations, first you have a land and then you have a law. If anything, what gives the power for a legislator to set a law is because they govern the land. In many ways, we have in Judaism the concept of dina de malchusa dina. The law of the land is binding. And one of the rationales is that because whoever controls the land, whoever's making that law, owns the land. And it was true. Kings used to own the land, and it was only by their favor that you were able to live on the land. One of the prerequisites, you want to live in our land, you have to abide by our law. Torah is different. Torah as a set of legislator, a set of law governing our life, governing our society, is not linked to a land. It's not because we have a homeland now we need to create a system of law. The laws exist independent of the land. Hence they had to be given outside the land of Israel. They had to be given in the wilderness, in no man's land, in a place that has no governing law, that has no legislator. It's no, unless we have a law, because our law is not linked to the land. And hence Torah uniquely existed beyond exile, beyond the destruction and the loss of sovereignty on the land of Israel. Our Torah and our laws, many of them not operable for obvious reasons, because weren't in control. We didn't have control of a society, and that's one of the miracles of modern Israel. But once again, and many books were written in the last 60, 70 years about once again re-engaging the Jewish laws or the aspects of Jewish law which are pertinent to society at large, because Jews never create societies. We had communities, we had individual religious life, communal religious. We never had societal, national Jewish life. But nonetheless, on the whole, the laws remained operative beyond the destruction, because again, they were given in the wilderness because they're not linked to the land. And coming back finally to this linkage between the content of our portion of the Mishkan and the laws around the Mishkan, and idea of it, and the Torah being given in the desert, is because those encampments had halachic significance. meaning they they represented. Sorry, there's a slightly different point. Actually, it's 8:30 already, so I'm not going to go into them. I think we'll stop here. Stop the share and stop the recording.